Hi, everyone. This is Anna Masker from ProfitLink. Thanks for joining our webinar today, all about saving money by automating your accounting. In these unprecedented times, I think everybody's looking to find some ways to gain efficiencies and save money with various headcount. And the accounting department is, there's opportunities there to save money as well. So I'm going to be your speaker today. If you're not familiar with our firm, ProfitLink does CFO advisory and crypto accounting for blockchain and tech companies, as well as working with professional service providers, providing an outsourced CFO and accounting and finance function. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what some of the accounting challenges were BC, before COVID, and some of the accounting challenges that are happening now and what we're seeing. So prior to COVID, the accounting function in many organizations worked, but wasn't optimized. A lot of times we see with our clients that the accounting function is kind of this island in the middle of the organization. Nobody really knows what they do sometimes, but they also seem to be very busy all the time. Sometimes getting information out of them is easy, sometimes not so easy, but overall, generally, most people don't feel like their accounting function isn't fully optimized. In some cases, if you don't have a board of directors or timelines, sometimes the closing process is a little slow. Sometimes latent with they're late or they've got incorrect information on them, maybe not up to the quality that you would like them to be. Although this is becoming less and less, there are still a lot of companies that have a lot of paper checks or do online manual bill pay, meaning when they have to write a check to somebody, they may not cut a paper check, but they go into their online bill pay system. A lot of printed reports, paper receipts, manual processes, and that worked well in an office environment. And then there's also that risk that happens when you have a lot of the knowledge controlled by one or two people. So whether this is a bookkeeper or a controller or a CFO, if you ask a business owner, I don't know very many people who know where the passwords are to the bank accounts. So this tends to be a risk. And especially in this world of COVID, before COVID, the risk was a lot less. But now with COVID and people potentially getting sick, this becomes a really big risk. Now with COVID, a lot of people have now been working from home. There's some challenges with inefficiencies. There's some challenges with communication. There's a lot more concern about controls. What are we really doing? How are we controlling the bank accounts, the money, etc.? And also more inefficiencies and miscommunications, as I mentioned before. So the accounting challenges during COVID continue, and so where does automation come in? I'll take one example of automation through the expense reports as being one way in which, as an example of how automation can really impact workflow, but also save you a lot of money. I was at a demo presentation by a software company as we were exploring some tech for a client of ours. And so we were exploring a solution around expense reporting. This client of ours had a lot of people who were traveling. They were doing installations in supermarkets in various different parts of the country. And so they had hotel bills and meal receipts and gas and tolls and all of that fun stuff. Anyway, so I was looking for an opportunity to kind of automate or look at exploring some technologies around that. So this software company actually had an in-person presentation in the days that we were actually doing in-person presentations. And so I was sitting next to another attendee and I asked her what we got to talking, and after the presentation I said, so, why are you here and what are you doing? And she's like, well, I'm looking for a way to streamline our reporting process and our expense reports. And so I asked her, okay, well, tell me a little bit about your process currently. And so she just started telling me all of the various steps that were involved with putting together one expense report. I'm not going to read through all of these, but if you do, basically there is a lot of paper. There's a lot of paper receipts. There's a lot of taping paper receipts and mailing them to different locations within the organization. Literally, the accounting function was at headquarters and the salespeople were in the field, so those were being mailed. You had manual double checking of the math, then coding of expenses, etc. And so when I asked her, I said, wow, this must be a really great solution for you, this technology we just sat through this demo for. And she said, you know what? It's really expensive. You know, it was $5 per month per user. And she was doing the math in her head. She had a lot of users. I think it was going to be, I don't know, somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 a month. And I said, that's expensive. And when you look at, if you take a step back, what's the true cost of that expense report? In her way, there's probably hundreds of dollars that are being spent of people's time, postage, errors and corrections versus $5 per month and using less time. So I took her process here and I kind of folded it into what the technology could do. And we eliminated, it eliminated a bunch of steps, but it also automated and created better controls at the same time. So instead of the expense report being filled out on paper, it's all done electronically. Instead of taking your receipts and taping them to a piece of paper and mailing them in, you just take a picture of your receipt and you attach that to your expense report. The math is done for you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we've had a lot of challenge with some clients, because we do these technology implementations for our clients. We show that a lot of these clients look at just the cost of the subscription and not the total cost of the actual work that needs to be done in order to put things together. So we want to make sure that in these conversations that we're thinking not about the $10 a month or the $5 a month per user, more so about what efficiencies can we get. And, so what is the true cost of that expense report? There were too many hands in her process touching that document, too much paper, too much time, prone to errors, manual checking and controls, and then also manual tracking of that expense report as it made its way through the workflow. So why is now the time to start automating your accounting? Well, I think it goes without saying there's a less volume going through your accounting department, which lends itself to a good time for implementing and testing systems. You've got people with extra bandwidth, they've got extra time, and then they have the ability to kind of absorb and test and implement this while things are a little bit quiet. Also, there's an opportunity in some cases to reduce headcount costs. If you have a lot of manual processes and you're cutting paper checks and you're scanning those bills and the checks all into a file folder and then scanning those and filing those in a virtual folder, there's a lot of steps that you could probably do a lot more with a lot fewer headcount. And technology has really accelerated over the last, say, 5 years, but really more so in the last 1 to 2. And the technology is so well fine-tuned that it is making a lot of the manual processes very obsolete. And so the systems and the processes and the technologies, can provide that the automation. And basically your accounting function should really just be like air traffic controllers, right? Controlling the way that the information goes in, validating, yes, that the computer coded it correctly, and approving and sending it into the accounting system. So the advantages of the technology advances are this OCR technology. So basically, optical character recognition technology will allow the computer to actually take an image of a bill and scrape the data off of that and populate it into the system so that you just validate it and there's no key punching at all. Maybe it's just some fine tuning of the expense report. And through artificial intelligence and machine learning, we're seeing that the computers are getting very good at recognizing patterns and also coding things appropriately. The other thing that's also helping is the integration of the apps to each other. And we're seeing what they're calling linking of applications, especially in the world of QuickBooks and QuickBooks Online, where you may have an app that has a special a special function, whether that's inventory or expense reporting. And that app actually hooks into another app that does a second piece of it. So whether it is bill pay or whatever time tracking, there are components that they hook in together. So it's creating more of an ecosystem, which is helping the technology stop the duplication of manual processes as well. In addition, these apps are starting to build out audit trails, controls, and they are optimal for remote work. 99% of them are cloud-based, which lends itself very well to remote work, which is the environment in which I think most accounting functions are working in today. So these are excellent for those pieces. And then there's automation of workflows and approval. And I guess you should take a step back and talk about what workflow is. I mean, I think most people probably understand it, but from our perspective, we look at, we kind of staple ourselves to an order and walk it through the entire process throughout our organization. And to us, that is a workflow. If an order is taken, and then what triggers other events to happen, and then how are those events managed and recorded, especially through the accounting function. So with these new apps, going back to our automation, these apps are automating the workflows. So instead of me having to take a bill and putting in somebody's inbox, a paper invoice, a paper bill, and putting in somebody's inbox for approval where they sign off on it, that stuff is starting to happen electronically. You're through this app, putting it into their queue, they assign it, they process it, they approve it, and then it goes directly back to you. So a lot of these apps, we're going to talk about some of them, are really exciting because it stops that manual process of walking a piece of paper over to somebody's inbox for approval. It also does a lot of, control mechanisms as well, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So the other thing is, with the automation, one last point is the important part is you may not want to reduce the headcount in your actual accounting organization, but if you could free up somebody's time to redeploy them to do more cash generating activities like collections, that's huge. You want to be optimizing your accounting function to be as much cash generating as possible. And collections is a great place to put some extra manpower or woman power. Okay, so we're going to talk not specifically about some of the applications, but I want to give you kind of the idea of all the applications that are available and how automation can work in your organization and layering in different components of this. Obviously, cloud-based accounting is the hot trend right now. We have moved all of our clients, or in the process of moving all of our clients, from a desktop QuickBooks version, which had a plethora of I want to say, I'm drawing a blank, a lot of features that we needed for our complex reporting. In our world, we start with what analytics we need out of the system, and then we re-engineer the system to generate that. Prior to about a year or so ago, QuickBooks Online, for example, did not have the ability to do some of that complex reporting we needed it to do. It has finally caught up in many cases with QuickBooks Desktop in some of those critical features. So we are now recommending for all of our clients moving QuickBooks Online, especially around things around job costing. That was always a tricky area in QuickBooks Online. They've upped their game, and so that's another thing you want to, we're moving into that. So cloud-based accounting, obviously optimal for working remotely. User access can be controlled and limited. We're not relying upon servers or physical locations, and then the automatic backups. So there are different tiers of cloud accounting systems depending on the size of business that you are and the complexity. There are certain things that do not work well in QuickBooks or Sage or even Xero, and that primarily is inventory. There are third-party apps that feed into those systems, but we feel like, you know, if you have, if you're truly a heavily inventory-based company, a solution like NetSuite is probably another solution that you want to look into. And if you need help selecting any of your accounting systems, or you feel like you've outgrown the system that you're on, you know, feel free to give us a call and we can do a quick analysis and assessment and kind of point you in the right direction. The thing is with these cloud-based accounting systems is that we're seeing that, you know, people used to call us and say, hey, I'm outgrowing QuickBooks. It doesn't function well for me. I think I need to move to a mid-market system. And, you know, so we always said, okay, let's take a time out and let's just see how you're using QuickBooks. And are you using it to its fullest extent? And 95% of the time, the answer was no. The answer was they didn't even know about some of the functions and features available for QuickBooks. And so if you properly set up your accounting system, you can gain a lot of information out of it, but also streamline some of your data inputs in order to make it work better for you. You know, note that going to a mid-market system like a NetSuite or even a Sage or a Microsoft Dynamics, those all, you know, come with pretty hefty price tags, as well as the need for a real solid controller or administrator to make sure those things work. So what we're seeing with these apps and the automation with the cloud-based accounting, going back to QuickBooks, is that it's starting to replicate some of the functions of an ERP system through the use of apps. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the apps that are next. So there are bill pay options, and I'm not going to go into each one of them. I just want to show you there are a lot out there, and it really depends on your specific situation of which app you should look at. But instead of you know, using paper checks or even online bill pay, these apps, what they do is you are using this app to enter, it synchronizes with your accounting system, I should say, pulls in your vendor list, for example, pulls in your chart of accounts and all your jobs. And so then you can process vendor bills through these systems, and they can actually issue payment for you right out of the system, just like online bill pay. But the added benefit is that it reduces the duplicate entry. So say if you were using a bill.com or an SAP Concur, it synchronizes back with QuickBooks, and then it'll and then the recording of that bill actually happens within QuickBooks without you having to double enter. So think about your AP staff and what they're doing now when it comes to processing an invoice. A lot of that can be alleviated through using a bill pay app. So one of the benefits are you have better control. You can actually see almost all of them have audit trails. So you can actually see what's happening. There's no physical check with your bank account information on it. We had a client just recently who was using paper checks. Somebody got a hold of one of their checks that was drawn on their account, whether it was for a vendor or whomever, we don't know, washed the check and then rewrote the check for a large amount of money. And the bank processed it. And it was only because the controller actually was watching that bank account every day that they found it. So through these apps, for example, it's not your bank account information being put on these checks. The physical checks are going out from that third-party app. You also have the ability, by the way, to do ACHs through this, and they're obviously less expensive than checks. You also, in these apps, have approval level and control. So you can limit what people can approve. So if you only want somebody to approve an invoice or a vendor bill up to, say, $5,000, you can do that within this. And it can escalate that invoice or that vendor bill above that $5,000 to say, okay, if it hits $5,000 for Joe Smith, it has to go to Joe's manager. And the system will automatically do that for you. And if Joe wasn't supposed to spend over $5,000, you have that control mechanism that will kick it out and alert you, as opposed to trying to do this manually and saying, kind of keeping track of who has what ability to spend. I will go back, actually, one other thing on the control mechanism for these apps is that there's an audit trail. It will tell you who approved it and when, and what queue it's sitting in. So if you have somebody who's getting backlogged on their approval, you can see how long things have been sitting in their queue. It does that reporting automatically for you. So if a vendor calls and says, hey, where's my payment, you can actually find out where that payment is along the workflow work chain. From a convenience perspective, the beautiful thing is the image of the bill travels throughout that workflow. So there's no double checking, did the check match the invoice amount? That invoice image follows that check all the way through. And you don't get that with the online bill pay if you're using it for, if you're using your bank as your online bill pay, there's still that disconnect. So there is a gap between when your bookkeeper goes and enters that payment versus what's sitting in your accounting system. In these apps, those are all integrated. We talked a little bit about customized workflows and reporting on where invoices are stuck. That reduces a tremendous amount of time. Our clients love the app feature and the ability to pay bills through their phone. So they can go and see what invoices are outstanding. They can actually pull up an image of that invoice on their phone. They can hit approve to pay, and the payment will go out from their account, but it's all done via the convenience of their phone. So a lot of our clients travel, maybe not so much these days, but travel a lot. So this virtual feature is really excellent for them. It brings the office with them a little bit. Fewer manual processes. We talked about the OCR technology. There is no scanning of bills, the images of the checks. Those are all archived and available to you. If you have a vendor who said, I didn't get your check from your online bill pay app, you can go in and see the check number and the image of the check and what date it was sent and if it was cashed or not. So just like you would in your normal bank. And I think we also talked about this with the integration with the accounting system reduces the amount of dual entry. So even if you just look at this one function of automation in your accounting function, bill pay is a huge bottleneck for a lot of clients. And so, getting an app installed, it might be a little bit of it'll be a lot of a change for some people, but once you have it humming, it works really well and people actually like it a lot better than the old process. If you're a professional service provider or if you are doing project tracking, there are a number of third-party apps that do time tracking and payroll that integrate with your payroll system and job costing. I only put 3 up here, but for those of us who are tracking job profitability, T-Sheets, Harvest, Core, all have different functions that can be utilized for that as well. So instead of manual paper timesheets or Excel spreadsheets, you can use one of these systems. So they automate timesheets. They're Department of Labor compliant. You get better time reporting because things are more real time and can roll up. There are some of these systems that actually track the budgeted hours versus the actuals. We have, in some cases, there are some of the apps allow for scheduling. There's also some that, and those, if you want to feed your hours into QuickBooks for job costing, you can do that definitely in the desktop version. You know, knowing what you are, your headcount cost per job is really important. And then, you know, some like core can handle really sophisticated workflows, reporting, tagging of time. You can record in all of these activities, you can record time by task. So you can see how much time is billable versus non-billable. You can see the true project time associated with a project. So these are really good in helping you understand how to price going forward. And you can track time by person, by task, by job, etc. You can slice and dice the data 100 ways to Sunday. So we love job costing because it really helps us help clients manage profitability, but more importantly, get their pricing right going forward. Let's talk about expense reporting and controls. So I mentioned in my first example, expense reporting, there are a number of apps out there. A lot are based on the function of taking a picture and the app reads the actual text that's on that, and it moves that into an expense report, which then of course goes into your accounting system. Again, better controls that you didn't have before when you're waiting for people to turn in those paper receipts and you have to keep hounding people and hounding people. You can match actually in many of these, your account, you can load in your Amex statement, for example, and it'll tell you what receipts you don't have. So it eliminates that that person with that paper statement or electronic statement checking off, I have a receipt for this, I have a receipt for this. You have clients that have 20-page long Amex bills. And so this is a huge time saver for them as well. The other thing is if you have a lot of staff that are traveling or you have policy limits around your travel, for example, you can only fly coach, not first class. You can only stay in hotels that cost less than $150 a night. You can only spend $25 per meal for dinner or whatever it is. Those spending limits are already built into these apps, and so it stops that duplication, that head count that you need in your accounting department to check and see if Joe Smith actually followed the policies that you had laid out. This is excellent for those who have field or salespeople that travel a lot. This is an excellent way to bring some of that accounting automation in-house. And you know, people in the field also really like it because they don't want to deal with where did that, you know, digging through their glove compartments for those pieces of paper as they're going to get gas, etc. Same thing with bill pay. You have those approval levels and control, and of course the convenience of the scanning of the receipts and sending with the expense report. You also have that automatic calculation, so there is no more Excel spreadsheet that does not tie to the actual receipts. Those automatic calculations happen because you are putting things right into the system itself. It's doing that, and it's also again through the OCR technology. It feeds into your payment information into your payment app like a bill.com, or it even can feed right into your payroll system if you do reimbursements through your paycheck processor. So expense reporting is a real bonus in reducing the administration around people who are traveling, and the folks in the field love it because they don't have the paper. This also, in addition to the approval levels and controls, this also has that workflow component to it. So you can, if you set it up properly, it can go from, you know, the salesperson to the manager, and if it's above a certain threshold, it goes to the manager's manager and gets escalated that way and processed. And again, these expense reports, the approvals, you can see everywhere it is in the queue, so there is no question about where it is, as opposed to having to make 100 phone calls and track down who's got the paper where. I almost wanted to start with this concept first, but I know everyone's really interested in saying, okay, well, what kind of applications can we get? We can't stress enough the importance of workflow design. Whenever we set up an application, whether it is QuickBooks, whether it is an expense reporting system, it's or a bill pay system, we want to think about it thoroughly before we start implementing. And that's the importance of workflow design. Just like a programmer would kind of figure out what needs to happen for their program, we do the same thing on the accounting side. And so I would strongly recommend, before you just run in and implement an app, think about what you want it to accomplish. The workflow design, like I said, is critical for a successful app implementation. And we try to explain this to our clients when we start an engagement with them. We'll spend a lot of time up front asking questions, trying to figure out what they wanted to accomplish, figure out where they're going with this, and then that's how we design it. So we map out the current process. We look at what the current bottlenecks are, what the current control issues are, because those all need to be, I don't want to say built into the system. They are already in the system, but you need to utilize them. And knowing how you utilize them can make the difference between a successful app implementation or not. Making sure you have a clear definition of what the workflows are. And then do a needs analysis, and that's saying, okay, what is it that, when you map out the current process, it's going to become pretty clear as to, all right, we have a problem because, we've got guys in the field and they're not in the office, but the paperwork is here. So going through, like, what are the critical things that you need to have in a system before you go and select one. I always like to say, think now and later. How does this app need to grow with you? This is so critical. I think people sometimes say, oh, you know what? I just found this app on the App Store. It's expense receipt capture. And that's fantastic and it works, but it works in isolation. So when it's you and maybe you and 2 others or you and 5 others, say in sales, that individual app doesn't work very well because it doesn't integrate with anything else. So when we work with our clients and we're doing an app implementation, it's always thinking about, what do I need it to do for now, our current needs, our current pain points, and then how will this or can this application scale with us as we grow? We like to say we want to have it have at least a 5-year longevity to grow with the business. So apps most of the time do, especially the apps that are subscription-based, which are almost 99% of them are, the subscription-based ones are constantly updating their system. So we want to look at what their development plan is, as well as what they've rolled out in the last year, so we can kind of get a better idea of, is it's investment going into this app that it can grow and have enhancements for some of the things maybe we want to have that they don't currently have right now. So it's more looking at an app strategically. And the thing with apps is you have to think about not only the investment of the subscription, but the investment of time you're going to require your people to invest in learning it, troubleshooting it, fighting it, as well as, making sure that it's done correctly and you have the right controls in place and the reports to make sure that people are using the app the right way. So workflow design is part of a bigger picture for any app implementation. Also, part of that design is finding the right tech stack. And I just threw some of the apps on here. You wouldn't have an app you wouldn't have an ecosystem like this with all of these guys, but I just threw them on there for example. What you want to think about is think of a hub and spoke, with your accounting system being kind of the central repository of all of that data. Where if you're using QuickBooks, for example, as that hub, you're going to have all these apps that are specialties that fix a function. And so you want them to both feed into QuickBooks in a two-way manner while they feed information in, and QuickBooks sends the information back. But then you also want to have that hook between them to make sure that, hey, if I can get one or two of these apps talking to each other, then I don't either have to do a manual sync or a manual dual entry. Again, we think of QuickBooks having an ecosystem around it. How you build your ecosystem basically replicates the enterprise resource planning systems or ERP systems, like the mid-market systems like NetSuite and Sage, etc. So we try to get as much longevity out of QuickBooks and the surrounding app ecosystem as we can before we move a client to mid-market, because that is, we're not opposed to doing that, but that is a big step for a sophistication perspective, as well as an investment in the system itself and the implementation. So one thing you do have to watch is that you are watching your subscription costs. And so it does add up. Each one of these is probably anywhere between, QuickBooks is $60 a month to, each app is probably another $20 a month, depending on how many users you have. It could be per user or for a group of users. So really important that you watch your subscription costs and make sure that you have somebody who's managing those. So if an employee perhaps leaves, that they get shut off. There's actually apps that will help you turn on and turn off all this ecosystem for you. So I have to say, there is a app for that, for pretty much everything within the app world, especially in QuickBooks. So there's an Intuit app store. If you go on, if you just Google Intuit App Store, you will see all of the various applications that are available. A couple others that I didn't mention. You have inventory apps that help you do purchase orders and inventory controls and inventory management. There's also apps that we've been using that are do batch uploads. So if you have, say, a lot of your data on an Excel spreadsheet and currently you have somebody manually keying that in, there are applications that do batch uploads. And again, you can do that on a transaction level. You can bring in your customer or vendor lists, etc. So there's lots of opportunities to streamline that process as well. So that wraps up kind of our automation. And as in conclusion, I think it's safe to say there's a lot of opportunity to, at this point in time, when we're in this great, some are calling it the great pause, where things are kind of slow, to use this time to reinvest in your business and think about how you can automate and streamline, especially your accounting function going forward. And the other thing I want to say is this technology is not going to go away. And things like QuickBooks Desktop eventually will be replaced by QuickBooks Online. So it's important that you think about your accounting function, not only now, but later. And you want to have the people who will embrace this technology as it gets rolled out, because you know that it's going to help streamline your organization and have your people do more with less. So that concludes our presentation. We have an upcoming webinar on quick tips for cost cutting. That's tomorrow, Friday the 24th at 11 a.m. Half an hour. We're just going to go through our hottest cost cutting tips for those who are interested. So that concludes our presentation, and I'm going to thank you all for joining us. And if there's anything else we can help you with, please don't hesitate to give us a call. You can reach me at this number below, or reach out to us at our website at profitlink.com. We do, like I mentioned, we help you design the systems, the ecosystem. We help you do the tech stack implementation, and we can also help assess what the optimal headcount structure is for your accounting department based on your workflow. So if we can help you with any of those things, please don't hesitate to call. We'd be happy to give you no charge consultation. So I'm going to stop the recording here for the open Q&A. Thanks.